Hello, welcome back to another review, this time of the 2000 film X-Men. Now, X-Men is honestly a really influential comic book film that doesn't get as much credit as it deserves for how it has influenced the comic book genre of film as a whole. I mean, there definitely are people who do acknowledge it and do give it the respect that it deserves. But if you think about it, without this film's success critically and financially, we probably would not have the MCU as we know it today. It might exist in a different form, but it wouldn't be the exact form that we see right now because this was Marvel's first mainstream big success. And it showed that their success with a film like Blade wasn't a fluke. And then, of course, after X-Men, then you had films like Spider-Man by Sam Raimi, and then the ball really started rolling for Marvel. And in a lot of ways, this film saved the entire superhero genre. Because before this movie, you had really shitty films like Batman and Robin and Steel and other movies like that were really damaging the superhero genre in film and in theaters. And so audiences were starting to get either sick of it, of this campy, really just corny type of superhero film, or they also just were tired of watching shitty movies. And so X-Men came along and changed that pattern. And the whole genre is much better off because of it. Anyway, this is a film that when it came out it was released on July 14th, 2000. I was super psyched, super excited. I mean, I was a huge X-Men fan growing up. I had tons of X-Men action figures. I grew up watching the 90s cartoon on Fox Kids. And so when I found out there was going to be an X-Men movie, I was thrilled. And I still remember the excitement of going to see it on opening weekend with my parents. And I loved it then, and I really like it now. I personally think this film holds up fairly well. It's kind of underrated, especially when it comes to uh, comic book films. So, anyway, X-Men, it features a cast and crew that's comprised of the director, Bryan Singer, and it features a screenplay by David Hayter, the Guyver himself from Guyver 2 Dark Hero, based on a story by Tom DeSanto and Bryan Singer. It stars Patrick Stewart as Professor X, perfect casting choice. When I was a kid and I had Professor X toys, I was always imagining that it was Picard. I was always imagining that it was Patrick Stewart because I also grew up watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and Star Trek: The Next Generation movies like First Contact. So I always thought it was a perfect casting choice for Professor X. And then when he was casted, I was like, this is a dream come true. And he is. He's perfect for this role. Hugh Jackman as Wolverine, another perfect casting choice. He was a relative unknown at the time. This is his first big acting role in the film, and he absolutely nailed it. Ian McKellen as Magneto, pitch perfect. Great. He and Patrick Stewart already have great chemistry because they're already great friends, and he's a phenomenal actor. Halle Berry as Storm looks the part. Famke Janssen. I'm gonna keep fucking up her name. I always do. I apologize. Famke Janssen as Jean Grey. She looks the part as well and does a good job. James Marsden as Cyclops. He looks like Cyclops, but I know he's supposed to be Dick, and he does a good job doing that. But yeah, that could be a little bit better. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in depth later. Bruce Davison as Senator Kelly. Now, for the longest time when I was a kid, I thought it was Jerry Singer. Jerry Springer. Jerry Singer. Oh, that's Bryan Singer's brother. Jerry Singer. Jerry Springer. Yeah, I thought it was Jerry Springer. I thought it wasn't Bruce Davison. I thought it was Jerry Springer And then it wasn't until years later when I saw the credits, but it was Bruce Davison. Okay, all right. It's not Jerry Springer. All right, I'm wrong. He kind of looks the part. He kind of does look like Jerry Springer. Rebecca Romijn Stamos as, or just Rebecca Romijn, because I don't think she's with John Stamos anymore, as Mystique. Damn! God, she's hot. I mean, I think I had one of my first sexual awakenings when I was a teenager with this movie, with Mystique. Because think about it, she's basically butt-ass naked. Just covered in blue paint and prosthetics. Ray Park, Darth Maul himself as Toad. Tyler Mane as Sabretooth. Ray Park was a lot of fun as Toad. He actually made Toad a cool character. And you could tell he's a very talented martial artist. And he puts that on display in this film. Does most of his own stunts. Tyler Mane is Sabretooth. He's big, tall, and imposing. I think the film did a really fantastic job making him look like the comic book Sabretooth. The only thing he was missing was a costume. And Anna Paquin as Rogue. This is probably one of her better performances. This is definitely the breakout role for her. She turned down a role in a film called Tart, I believe, to be Rogue in this film. Features a score by Michael Kamen, which I really loved. I think is fantastic. I think it's a great score. Cinematography by Newton Thomas Siegel. Definitely a plus point for the film. Editing by Stephen Rosenblum, Kevin Stitt, and John Wright. The editing is taut. It's well done. Production design by John Meyer. I really like the look of the film. I love the look of the X Mansion, the underground levels, Magneto's lair. Everything has a smooth, slick, sleek look to it, and I really do like it. And I think that the production design by John Meyer, or Meir, does not get enough credit. And also visual effects by Digital Domain, which actually hold up fairly well for effects work that is 17 years old. Now, this movie was actually in pre-production many, many years before it eventually hit the theaters, slashed its way onto cinemas in 2000. Because apparently, actually, Marvel Comics writers and chief editors Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas, they wrote an X-Men screenplay in 1984 when Orion Pictures actually had an option for the film rights. Orion was going to be the first one to put X-Men on the big screen, but development stalled when Orion began facing the financial troubles. So they were having financial problems even before they eventually went under. But they're back now under, I think they released a lot of independent films. Throughout 1989 and 1990, Stan Lee and Chris Claremont were in discussions with Carlico Pictures for an X-Men film adaptation. So you go from one defunct company that has money troubles in Orion to another in Carlico. Carlico was approached with James Cameron as producer and Catherine Bigelow directing. I'd be kind of curious to see what she would lend to an X-Men film. A story treatment was written by Bigelow, with Bob Hoskins, of all people, being considered for Wolverine. Bob Hoskins? What? Bob Hoskins? Are you serious? Bob Hoskins? Bob Hoskins is Wolverine? No. That's terrible casting. I don't buy it at all. And Angela Bassett being considered for the role of Storm. Yeah, I can see that. The deal fell apart, though, when Stan Lee caught Cameron's interest on a Spider-Man film, and Carlico went bankrupt, and the film rights reverted back to Marvel. And you would think, wow, 2 attempts to try to make X-Men. Hollywood's not going to keep trying. Well, you're wrong, because they did. Because in December of 1992, Marvel discussed selling the property to Columbia Pictures to no avail. This time it was Marvel trying to sell it to Hollywood, but Hollywood was like, yeah, no, tried this 2 times already and didn't work out. But meanwhile, Avi Arad produced the animated X-Men TV show for Fox Kids. Fox was impressed by the success of the TV show. It was a huge show, it really was. I remember catching it every time that I could on Saturday mornings when I was a kid. Because my dad would have me for the weekend, because my mom and my dad divorced when I was really young. So my dad would have me for the weekend, and of course my mom would have me for the rest of the week so I could go to school and stuff like that. So my dad would have me for the weekend, and I always remember getting up Saturday morning, and because usually he'd pick me up on Friday nights. So so I'd have Friday night and Saturday and Sunday with my dad. So I always remember getting up early in the morning and watching cartoons on Fox Kids, watching X-Men, uh, Spider-Man the animated series, and Batman, and it was a great time. DC and Marvel lived together peacefully, and fans were able to enjoy DC and Marvel cartoons, some of the best ever, on one network, at one time. It was awesome. So Fox was impressed with the success, so they actually were interested in making a film. So producer Lauren Schuler Donner purchased the film rights for them in 1994, bringing in Andrew Kevin Walker to write the script. Walker's draft involved Professor X recruiting Wolverine into the X-Men, which consists of Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Angel, which I believe that's pretty much the original crew from the first issues of the comic. The Brotherhood of Mutants, which consisted of Magneto, Sabretooth, Toad, Juggernaut, and the Blob, try to conquer New York City, while Henry Peter Garrick and Bolivar Trask attack X-Men with three 8 feet tall sentinels. The script focused on the rivalry between Wolverine and Cyclops, as well as the latter's self-doubt as a field leader. Part of the backstory invented for Magneto made him the cause of the Chernobyl disaster. The script also featured the X-Copter in the Danger Room. As much as I like this movie, the movie that we got, honestly, if we could have gotten this film, I probably would like it a lot more. But I still really like this film. I still think it's an excellent film in its own right, and I think it's fairly underrated. But at the same time, this is like straight out of the comic book, and probably based on the 90s animated series, which in my opinion is one of the best animated series ever made. So, can you imagine hearing like an orchestral version of the X-Men cartoon theme in theaters and having this plot? That would be awesome. Walker turned in his second draft in June of 1994. And apparently there were a bunch of other writers that were brought in to do rewrites. Laeta Kalogridis, John Logan, James Shamus, and Joss Whedon. Yes, that Joss Whedon. Were brought on for subsequent rewrites. One of the scripts kept the idea of Magneto turning Manhattan into a mutant homeland, while another hinged on a romance between Wolverine and Storm. Whedon's draft featured the Danger Room and concluded with Jean Grey dressed as the Phoenix. The script was apparently rejected because of its quick-witted and pop culture referencing tone, and the finished film contained only 2 dialogue exchanges that Whedon had contributed. That's surprising. I mean, that's kind of ironic, actually, because look at Marvel films now. They're quick-witted and they reference pop culture as much as they possibly can. So Joss Whedon was ahead of its time here with his script for X-Men, but studios back then weren't having it apparently. So another writer was brought on board named Michael Chabon. Michael Chabon pitched a six-page film treatment, a six-page film treatment to Fox in 1996. It focused heavily on character development between Wolverine and Jubilee, and included Professor X, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Beast, Iceman, and Storm in the team. Under Chabon's plan, the villains would not have been introduced until the second film. Shitty plan. Bad idea. Glad that didn't happen. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine an X-Men film where it's just about the X-Men? There's no conflict, there's no villains, there's no anything. It's just character development and nothing else. Fox also considered Brett Ratner as a director and offered the position to Robert Rodriguez because eventually, Michael Chabon's plan was thrown out, and then they had another writer come in, David Hayter. David Hayter got brought in. He wrote his version. That's the version that finally got greenlit. And Fox considered Brett Ratner as a director, which is interesting because Brett Ratner went on to direct The Last Stand, They offered the position of director to Robert Rodriguez, who at this time might not have been a bad choice because he wasn't Robbie Rod yet, but he turned it down. And following the release of The Usual Suspects, Bryan Singer was looking to do a science fiction film. And Fox offered him Alien 4, Alien Resurrection, which Joss Whedon also contributed to. But producer Tom DeSanto felt that he would be more appropriate for X-Men. And the rest is history. Signed up for X-Men. He's a fan of the X-Men. It shows in his directing. You can tell that he's a fan of these characters. He has a passion for it. This is a passion project. Uh, and so, and there was originally they were going to start shooting in 98 or 99, but then something happened. So then Bryan Singer went on to direct Apt Pupil, and then things settled down enough. And then after he was done with Apt Pupil, then he geared up to direct X-Men. Fox, they projected the budget at $75 million for the film, and they rejected the treatment, which they estimated would have cost $5 million or more. Beast, Nightcrawler, Pyro, and in the Danger Room had to be deleted before the studio greenlighted X-Men. Understandably so. I mean, this movie does look like every bit of the $75 million is on the screen. But at the same time, yeah, $75 million would not have been enough at that time to have Beast, which the makeup effects alone probably would have cost a lot of money. Nightcrawler, Pyro, those are two characters that are really effects driven and effects heavy. The Danger Room alone would have cost probably millions to make the set and to do the effects. It would have been cool to see though, especially in this film, because this movie used as much practical effects as it possibly could, especially with the sets and so on. Even the scene where Magneto lifts up cars with his powers, he lifts up these two police cars into the air, and they come crashing down. That was all done practically. That was not CGI. Then we have the casting, which the casting ended up being pitch perfect in my opinion, but it wasn't quite there just yet from the beginning. Apparently, Russell Crowe was Bryan Singer's first choice to play Wolverine. I don't know. I like Russell Crowe, but I just can't really see him in the part. But he turned it down. Instead, he recommended his friend, actor Hugh Jackman, for the part. Jackman, though, was an unknown actor at the time, and while a number of more established actors offered their services for the role, with Singer casting Dougray Scott. Dougray Scott, you might know him as the bad guy in Mission Impossible 2. Part of Scott's contract included a sequel, but Scott backed out due to scheduling conflicts with Mission Impossible 2, and then Jackman was then cast 3 weeks into filming based on a successful audition. So, Jackman was pretty much their third choice, and it worked out marvelously. Patrick Stewart was first approached by Singer to play Xavier on the set of Conspiracy Theory, which was directed by X-Men executive producer Richard Donner. Yeah, Richard Donner was one of the producers for this film. So James Caviezel was also originally cast as Cyclops, but he backed out due to scheduling conflicts with Frequency, which I'm fine with. The way Cyclops was written, he wouldn't have had much to do, and he was better off in a film like Frequency. James Marsden was unfamiliar with this character, but he soon became accustomed after reading various comic books. Marsden modeled his performance similar to a Boy Scout. You can tell. You can definitely tell. He's got this Boy Scout attitude about him. Eric Mabius, yeah, that Eric Mabius, the wannabe Crow, expressed interest for the role of Cyclops but was turned down, and Marsden was cast. Angela Bassett was approached to portray Storm in late 1997, as was Janet Jackson, but they turned the role down. Anna Paquin, like I said earlier, she dropped out of her lead role in Tart in favor of X-Men. And Terrence Stamp was considered for Magneto before Singer cast Ian McKellen, who had acted in his previous film Apt Pupil. Now, McKellen is fantastic. He's really phenomenal in Apt Pupil, and he's really great here as Magneto. But yeah, I could kind of see Terrence Stamp. I could see him pulling it off because he's a good actor as well. He plays great villains. Can you imagine that? Terrence Stamp could have played Zod and Magneto. But I'm fine with Ian McKellen. He's great. So, they also had to switch up some kind of design and stuff like that. So, and what I mean by design is the costumes. You notice in this film and the other movies, the X-Men aren't wearing their bright colored costumes from the comics. Well, there was a reason for this. Now, the filmmakers, they decided not to reproduce or replicate the X-Men costumes seen in the comics. Stan Lee and Chris Claremont actually supported this decision. Claremont himself, he's quoted here, he said, "You can do that on a drawing, but when you put it on people, it's disturbing." And so producer co-writer Tom DeSanto had also been so supportive of using the blue and yellow color scheme of the comics, but came to conclude that they would not work on screen. So what we got later was something like X-Men First Class, which I'm not a fan of the movie, but I do like the costume design with the yellow and the black. I think that looks really good. But what we got is black leather. And I don't mind it. I think it's actually a pretty cool look. And led to a fun line by Cyclops, where Wolverine is complaining about the leather. And apparently Singer himself added this line. And it's one of my favorite lines in the film, where Cyclops goes in and says, "What would you prefer, yellow spandex?" So I always love that line, and kudos to Singer for coming up with that one. And it was a way for him to address the fans' complaints, and I remember the whole theater pretty much laughing pretty heartily at that when the film came out, when I saw it in the theater in 2000. Wolverine's claws, they required a full silicone cast of Hugh Jackman's arm, and over 700 pairs for Jackman and his stunt doubles. Yeah, actual practical effects. That's why these claws look phenomenal. That's why they look fantastic. That's why they look great. That's why they look real in this movie, is because they did it real for the most part. Unlike X-Men Origins Wolverine, where the claws are entirely CGI and they look like shit. And Rebecca Romijn, her prosthetic makeup took 9 hours to apply. Poor girl. Can you just imagine that? Just sitting there in a chair for 9 hours. And if that wasn't bad enough, she could not drink wine, she couldn't use skin creams, or even fly the day before filming, because it could have caused her body chemistry to change slightly, which would have caused the 110 prosthetics applied to her skin to fall off. So between takes, the makeup department kept Romijn isolated in a windowless room to ensure secrecy. Romijn reflected, "I had almost no contact with the rest of the cast. It was like I was making a different movie from everyone else. It was hell." Yeah, that sounds like hell, because you're just alone. You can't have the bonding with the other cast and crew. You're just in this room by yourself. That's pretty awful. But she turned in a pretty good performance, and I'm glad they took the precautions, because the makeup looks great. Really does. And for the music, Singer approached John Williams to compose the film score, but Williams turned down the offer because of scheduling conflicts. Then Singer set on his usual composer that has composed most of his other films, named John Ottman, but Fox pushed the X-Men film from December December release of 1999 to July. I think it was December 2000 maybe, and then they pushed it to July. And so Ottman's commitment to direct Urban Legend's final cut made him not able to work with Singer. He was not able to do X-Men. So Michael Kamen was eventually hired. And, they had to settle for Michael Kamen. And you honestly picked a pretty good composer to settle for. I mean, you're settling for the guy who did the score for Die Hard. So Michael Kamen is a great composer in his own right. And so it's not like they had to settle for a shitty composer or anything. They still got Michael Kamen to do the score. And I honestly like his score in this better than any other score I've heard in any of these other films so far from X-Men. John Ottman did fine with X-Men 2, but Michael Kamen's score, to me, it just has that more heroic feel to it. It instills genuine emotions in me. especially the Logan and Rogue piece of music. That is such a heartfelt, emotionally charged piece of music. I dare you to listen to that piece of the score and not get chills because it is so well put together. And I love his main theme for the X-Men. It sounds like a souped up version of the cartoon theme. Now it isn't exactly the cartoon theme, but you can hear elements of it, and I think he was inspired by it, and it shows. And Kamen was also, he was kind of under the gun. So he was hired. The film was only completed shortly before its premiere. So he was rushed. So he wrote the score to the finished scenes, which were sent to him just as his work was done on them. So he just had to like just work really, really quickly. And there really wasn't a lot of time. And he turned in a really memorable, underrated score. Now, the film has a pretty simple synopsis. The plot is actually, it's a strong point. In other instances, it's kind of weak, especially in the climax. The film takes place in the near future, where children are being born with a special X factor in their genes, giving them special powers and making them mutants. The seeds of a new Holocaust are being sown by Senator Robert Kelly, played by Bruce Davison. The situation brings into opposition the fellow mutants and former friends. Eric Lensher, aka Magneto, played by Ian McKellen, and Professor Charles Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart. While Xavier wants a peaceful means of stopping the hatred towards mutants, Magneto seeks to even things out with a machine that would speed up the mutation process in all humans, making everyone equal. To stop Magneto, Xavier brings together a special group of mutants called the X-Men to stop him. So it plays out in a lot of ways, kind of like an episode of the cartoon or just an issue or a story arc of the comic. So that simplistic sort of plot where there's no plot within a plot, there's none of that, was actually kind of refreshing. In fact, it was really refreshing to watch a film that was not a part of the MCU. This is its own movie. It wasn't trying to incorporate everything. It wasn't trying to connect all the dots. It was an origin story that just started off from scratch. And it was its own story and it was its own universe. So this is one of the reasons why I don't mind Fox or some other companies maintaining the rights to some of their comic book franchises, because that way they can still do their own thing with it. That's why you can have something like Deadpool. Disney would not let Deadpool exist. Never happened. Because Deadpool represents everything that Disney does not really like, except for, I mean, you have the Netflix shows by Marvel, so maybe there might be a Deadpool show on Netflix. But in theaters, Disney's not going to put their name on a Deadpool movie unless it's PG-13. They're not going to put their name on a Punisher film unless it's PG-13. So, and they sure as hell would not have done Logan. So Fox is still maintaining the rights to X-Men, and in a lot of ways it's a good thing. Now, the plot also takes more of a traditional science fiction approach to things, and that was much appreciated. Not only by audience members back in 2000 when the film came out, but also by critics. Because, wow, we're taking a comic book film and we're taking it seriously. This isn't campy. This isn't comic booky. There's comic book elements to it. It's based on a comic book, but it's taking it rather seriously. But it still has enough fun. I mean, there's still some fun one-liners. The team still have great chemistry with one another and personality. And this is the first superhero film I can think of that really did that. You had Blade, but that was more of a niche film for horror fans, and it was a hit, but it was never going to be the mainstream success that X-Men was. X-Men paved the road for all of the other Marvel films to follow, and other superhero films. Even things like Batman Begins. Because X-Men provided that template and showed that this template could work, and audiences would eat it up. And you could appeal to fans of the comics and appeal to wide audiences by having a film that's based on a comic book, but also having a plot that isn't super based on all these other comic storylines. It can be its own sort of thing, and it can also take itself somewhat seriously, and but not too seriously to the point where it's dour or boring. So I think that was really a nice balance that it achieved, and there was a reason why this was a success, and the reason why people still like this film to this day. And that's one of the many reasons why I like the movie. Is I love that it has this blend of the comic and traditional science fiction. It's less fantasy and more sci-fi. So this movie I had not seen in a long time. I remember watching it all the time on VHS though, because as soon as it came out around Thanksgiving on VHS, my parents got the tape, and I think I watched it like that night. I'm trying to remember, maybe it was Thanksgiving or was it Christmas? It might have been Christmas, because it might have been a Christmas present. I don't know for sure though, but I know I had the tape, and I remember what it looked like. It had the X doors, and it had X-Men on the front. It was all shiny and reflective. And I even had X-Men toys, man. I had toys that were tie-ins to this film. Uh, I might be taking a bunch of people way back here, but do you remember, like, did any of you guys have any of the X-Men toys that tied into this film? Because I did. I had Sabretooth, I had Wolverine, and I had this Statue of Liberty playset, which was the head of the Statue of Liberty with the spires, and you had one that could like fall off, like Wolverine scratched it off in the movie. And inside of it, you turn it around, and on the inside, there's like these, the metal pieces of metal that held the X Men in place by Magneto, and it also had like this conveyor belt for some reason in there that I guess was to make the figures lose their footing. I don't know. It was like a treadmill. Now, and I remember those X-Men figures very fondly. In fact, I had Wolverine for many years, but he finally eventually just broke into a bunch of pieces. And what I remember the most about them is they had the Wolverine figure, at least, and the Sabretooth one I had. They had this weird rubbery skin. It's like their face was covered in this rubbery flesh material. So they're trying to make it feel like realistic skin, and it just looked creepy. It was weird. But I still really liked the figures because I was a big fan of the film. Huge fan of the movie. In a lot of ways, I still am. Watching this again was a blast. It was a blast from the past. It was a nostalgia bomb. It was just like, whoa, holy shit, wow. And I totally remember all this. This is so cool. It was like I was back in the movie theater when I was a teenager watching the movie again for the first time. It was really a lot of fun. And honestly, I have quite a few pros for X-Men. The directing, for one, Bryan Singer does a really great job here. Um, he really handles it really well. He does well with the action when it is there. He does well with the other aspects of it, the effects work and balancing all of that, which is pretty impressive considering he didn't do a lot of effects-heavy films before this. You can tell his passion for the source material is there because it pours through every aspect of the film. Yeah, and his direction of all of the practical set pieces and the stunts and all of that is pretty impressive. The cinematography is equally impressive as well. Like I said earlier, it's sleek, it's stylish. The editing is tight, and it really adds to the film's pacing, which is a really big pro. This film is not boring to me at all. It goes by at a fairly quick pace. It's got a good structure to it. It introduces the characters, but not in a way where it takes too long. And every now and then you have a little bit of an action sequence or a little bit of a scene here and there to keep the pace going. And then it builds up to the climax, which it could have been a bit better, the climax. And I'll talk about that later. But for the most part, the film was really well paced. For a film that's like 104 minutes, it goes by fairly quickly. The writing by David Hayter, the Guyver himself, is really solid. The balancing act between the real life, the sort of realism of the real world with the superhero science fiction aspects is handled really well. He does a good job not giving away too much, still leaving questions, but to the point where they're not frustrating. And the questions about what is Wolverine's origin? What's going on with that? Uh, Speaking of that, the cinematography also ties into that as well. In the flashback scenes with Wolverine, I really love how those scenes are shot. They look like something straight out of the X-Files. And I'm a big fan of that show, so I thought that was a really nice touch with the green lighting and all of that. So yeah, David Hayter did a bang-up job writing the film. The casting and the performances are all top-notch. Even though James Marsden, the Cyclops character himself, could be written a lot better, it's one aspect of the film I thought was a con, and I'll go more in depth on that soon. But for the most part, the performances were great. Good casting. The X-Men were well casted. They fit their roles. Uh, the performances by the cast were great. I mean, this is probably Halle Berry's best performance as Storm, because later on, as she became more of a bigger star, she kind of started to not really be as enthusiastic about her performance in these X-Men films, and it shows. Hugh Jackman is the standout here. You can tell that he was destined for stardom after this role in this film. Uh, Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen, they work great off each other. They have great back and forth. Um, and Wolverine and Cyclops do play off each other fairly well. Rogue and Wolverine have Anna Paquin and Hugh Jackman. They have wonderful chemistry with one another, and it's a very sweet side of Wolverine that you don't see a lot in a lot of the Wolverine films is on display here. It shows you that he's more than just this beast. He's more than that. And they all delivered their lines well too. They had some fun lines of dialogue and personality and quips to say. And I know it's pretty popular to say Storm's line is pretty shitty, like when she's talking to Toad, and she's all like, "You know what happens when a toad gets struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else." And I know it's the in thing to make fun of that line, but when I watched the film again in context, the line didn't bother me at all. I'll take lines like that over the sad, sack, dour, let's not have any fun stuff that Bryan Singer started to do later in the franchise when he returned. I'll take I'll take a cheesy line like that. That just shows me that they're having fun. The score, in particular, Checkmate, the end credits, and the Logan and Rogue theme. I talked about those earlier. Love them both. Kamen's score is honestly pretty underrated. And the visual effects and the stunt work and the choreography. This film doesn't use barely any CGI. And what is there looks pretty good for a film this old. The film that's going to be like 20 years old in like 3 years. But the visual effects, for the most part, I mean, really handled really well because they did it practically as much as they possibly could. Uh, and I really appreciated seeing sets and seeing these characters interact and move around and do stunts and do this kind of stuff on real sets, not behind a green screen. I really appreciated that. This kind of made me like miss this kind of thing. I miss this type of filmmaking. Compare this to the set pieces in something like Apocalypse. It's night and day. In Apocalypse, you can tell they're not really there, or if they are there, there's all this shit that's added with the computer later. They throw in filtering, they do all this stuff. And with this, there's no filtering, there's none of that shit. There's no extra CGI added in the background for no reason to smooth things out or whatever. They shoot on sets. There might be some digital mats that are put in here and there, and there might be a few bits of CGI, like the X-Jet at one point, and the Blackbird, and some other things like when Senator Kelly like turns into goop. But for the most part, it's done fairly practical, and I really appreciated that a lot. And the practical effects that are there, especially the Senator, God, man, that whole stuff with the Senator turning into like a jellyfish creature, like a jellyfish mutant, that always freaked me out. Like I would always like look away from the screen when I was a kid because I just could not watch it. Nowadays, it's actually it's still pretty hard to watch because it's the effects are really good and the stunt work, huge props to the stuntmen. I mean, wow, people actually do get flown through trees. Wow, people actually are doing flips and stunts. Wow, that somebody's actually flying into a lake. It's not CGI. We don't have CGI stuntmen. People are actually doing stunts. The choreography with the fight choreography, especially with the fights with Mystique and Wolverine versus Sabretooth, really well done. And there's no shaky cam, there's no quick cut either. Which I really appreciate a lot. It's really nice to see. And yeah, it just makes a lot of these scenes. They're smaller, little bit smaller action set pieces, but it makes them so much more epic. Because hey, we're taking a lot of time with it, and we're not rushing things, and we're not using CGI as a quick fix, and that there's something to be said about that. Where they didn't have the quick fix, so they had a few set pieces, but the few set pieces that they had, they could focus all their energy on and do them really well. Instead of what we have nowadays with CGI, where you have all these different CGI effects, and it's not possible to put all your effort, maximum effort, into all of these CGI effects. So some look pretty shitty, and some look better than the others. So here it's a consistently good because they don't have too many effects. As for any cons, there really aren't very many at all. Cyclops is one for me because he's a much stronger character in the comics and the cartoon. Here, he's a dick. He's not really a leader, and he doesn't really do that much. So that's disappointing. He's getting foiled by Wolverine at every turn, and just basically made into kind of a pussy. So I don't appreciate that characterization. So that's one aspect by David Hayter, by the Guyver, that I wasn't a fan of. And I really hope that they have Cyclops in I think Apocalypse. I hope they do him justice in these later films because he deserves better. Even though I like this film quite a bit, Cyclops is definitely a weak point. James Marsden's performance is fine. It's just how the character was written. And it could have used a little bit more action, like one more action set piece with the X-Men before they, like a little bit more in the train station sequence. Like them actually doing something more other than basically just getting defeated. Um, and the climax is kind of weak because it's mostly the Wolverine show. And I'm fine with that. Wolverine kicks ass, he fights with Mystique, but Jean Grey, she gets covered with that sticky stuff by Toad, and I always like that scene too because the practical effect there I thought was really well done. And this Ray Park makes Toad a cool character and fun to watch because in the comics Toad is some fat schlub who's just awful, but Toad's actually tolerable in this film. Um, I mean, it's just Cyclops. He blasts Sabretooth. I think he shot him once in the woods as well. But like he's tied up, and the other X-Men are tied up by Magneto later. So it's just kind of like I'd like to see the X-Men do more together in the climax. Storm gets her moment. Jean Grey doesn't really have a moment. She just lifts Wolverine up to the machine, and Cyclops. I guess she moves his glasses so we can put them on and blast Sabretooth. But Cyclops is just tied up. I mean, so that's one aspect that could have been improved upon. But overall, I don't have very many cons. There aren't very many cons of this film. Pretty much most of everything else works out really well. And Yeah, it was a great origin story. Definitely one of the best origin story films out there, and honestly, one of the first. So yeah, the film, I'm not the only one that liked it because the movie was a pretty big hit when it came out in theaters. It made over $200 million, made $296.3 million in the box office, which is good because in all honesty, Fox was taking a risk with this film. The superhero genre was stuck in a rut. It was didn't really have the best track record in people's minds over the past few years before this film was released. And so they were taking a risk. And thankfully, the risk paid off. And it led to other superhero films, as well as the absolutely epic and amazing sequel, X2 X-Men United, which is going to be the next review. But anyway, I don't know what else to say about X-Men. I've talked your ears off for like 40 some minutes. A lot of it was interesting stuff, though, I thought. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I don't know what to say about the film, except if I was going to rate it out of 5 stars. I would give the movie 4 out of 5 stars. Because Cyclops pissed me off, kind of wasted him. I could have used a bit more action, and the climax is a bit weak. But other than that, it has a lot of strong points to it. And it's a bit underrated. I think it actually held up well. I don't think it's that dated. I don't think it's an example of a Marvel film that doesn't hold up nowadays. Uh, I think it's one of the best X-Men films. It's not the best X-Men film, but I definitely think it's one of the best X-Men films. But anyway, thanks for watching my review, and as always, I will see you guys later. See ya.